We got Tom on the line, Katrina? Okay.
I'll email him. He said.
Good evening. First, start with Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk will call the roll.
Chairperson Carroll,
Here.
Vice Chair Young. Here. Secretary Treasurer Heft. Here. Mayor Morrow.
Here.
Councilmember Gearbaugh. Here. Staff Rep Weberline. Here. Commissioner Beardsley.
Here.
Commissioner Fosdick.
Here.
And Commissioner Troika.
Here. I would like to welcome Staff Representative Weberline to our first meeting. Welcome. Are there any proposed amendments to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair, I'll move to approve the agenda as distributed.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Are there any proposed amendments to the minutes? All those in favor of approval of the minutes?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comments. The person is requested but not required to state their name and address for the record. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. The citizen comment period will be limited to a total of 45 minutes. And we do have two items on the agenda. We will have citizen comments for each of those at the appropriate time. So first, public hearing, application from Romanerio Barry of AM and BH Industries, LLC, for a preliminary site plan for a new medical marijuana provisioning center, remodeling the existing 1,350 square foot building and adding 20 new parking spaces located at 751 West Michigan. Parcel number 18-01-325-007.
Mr. Chair, as we discussed before the meeting, I'm recused on this matter.
Commissioner Troika is excused. City Planner Auerbach, you want to go over your report?
Sure. For everyone in the audience, my name is Mike Auerbach with Carlisle Wortman, the city's planning consultants. You have a copy of our review in the meeting packet. Our review speaks to both the preliminary site plan and the special land use application. Under the city zoning ordinance, those two items are reviewed simultaneously. And then the Planning Commission makes a recommendation to council regarding the special land use and standard approval for the preliminary site plan. So as indicated, the use proposed is a medical marijuana provisioning center for property located at 751 West Michigan Ave. And you have our initial review in your packet dated March 2nd, 2022. The applicant then provided a response letter and made some revisions to their a site plan to address the issues, some of the issues we identified in that review. They also provided additional details about the operation, including a security plan that gives an overview of the facility's operations and security procedures, as well as an odor control plan. And then we submitted an addendum to our report in response. For the site plan review itself, this is a roughly half-acre site for property zone C3 general business. The provisioning center will occupy an existing commercial building that is 1,350 square feet and was formerly an ice cream business, Mickey's Dairy Twist. The facility will have a 9-seat waiting room partitioned from a limited access retail area and then a staff-only space with secure storage, as well as public and private restrooms. There's also a second existing building on site, which we believe was a dwelling at one point. That will be demolished and replaced with a parking lot island in the roughly center of the site, and the remainder will be parking. 20 parking spaces are proposed, including one barrier-free space, as well as a dumpster enclosure. To clarify the terminology, a provisioning center is specifically a commercial operation that purchases marijuana from a grower or processor and sells it or otherwise supplies it only to registered qualifying patients or their caregivers. And this use does not include recreational sales. Again, this provisioning centers are a special land use in the C3 district. And as an additional note, following site plan review and special land use review, presuming those are approved, the applicant will then have to obtain a license from the city where the odor mitigation plan, security plan will be reviewed in greater detail. Provisioning centers are required to obtain a license and then, which is renewed annually under the city's general code. So then to skip to page 5 of our review, the city's zoning ordinance doesn't have any additional standards specific to provisioning centers beyond what's otherwise required for any other site plan. And those standards are outlined in section 805. At this stage, the site plan is somewhat preliminary, just gives a general overview of the layout of the site, building, parking, access drives, and other facilities. The remainder of the site plan items like landscaping and lighting will be reviewed in greater detail at the final site plan stage. So in regards to required setbacks and other dimensional requirements, the existing building meets all the dimensional requirements applicable for the district, and we see no issues there. In terms of natural features, the site's already developed. It slopes generally from downwards from west to east, but besides from that, there are no wetlands, woodlands, or it's not within a floodplain to our knowledge, so we see no issues in terms of natural features. In terms of the overall building location and site arrangement, we see no issues with the use and arrangement of the site in terms of the indoor operations itself. However, as we mentioned in our review, the application and then the subsequent letter mentioned that there will be on-site traffic management, or that staff will manage traffic on-site, and there will also be a curbside ordering component. That does have some potential implications for the layout, traffic demand, and parking needs, and access and circulation. So we would simply need more information to evaluate that, and recommend that the applicant provide some more detail, specifically how curbside orders will be placed, where staff will enter and exit the building from to serve customers, whether specific places will be designated, parking spaces, that is, will be designated for curbside pickup, and the details of access management plan if proposed. That'll allow us to complete a full assessment of the site, again, in terms of access, circulation, and safety, as well as verifying how the zoning ordinance regulates that sort of activity. So in terms of parking, when a specific use is not listed in the zoning ordinance, section 1304, which establishes parking requirements for different uses, the zoning administrator may select a use that is most similar in character and apply those requirements. So in our assessment, given that the provisioning center is limited to serving patients, qualified patients, instead of a larger recreational consumer base, we feel that the medical and dental office use, which requires one space for every 150 feet of floor area, is appropriate. Zoning regulations for provisioning centers are still relatively new in Michigan, but of the communities we could find that adopt them, that one space for 150 square feet requires a little more parking than other communities seem to be requiring for this use. So as applied, and both with the number of spaces proposed, there'll be more than enough parking on site to meet that requirement. The building would require 9 spaces and 20 are provided. And for a building this size, under 2,000 square feet, no loading area is required. The applicant in the revised site plan shifted the parking areas to accommodate more landscaping along the perimeter, which we did recommend. However, some additional information is necessary to allow the commission and the city to evaluate whether the parking on site is adequate. The first is the number of employees anticipated to be on site during a peak shift. The applicant indicates that 25 will be employed overall, but in terms of assessing parking, the question is how many will be on site during that peak shift. The other bit of information to complete or to assess the parking are the anticipated weekend trips. The applicants provided peak anticipated weekday trips, which will be 15 vehicle trips total in a typical weekday hour. But again, it's fair to us to it should be determined that expected trips on weekends, as they may be more intensive and will get more customers during the weekends than on weekdays. So those are the two additional pieces of information we recommend that the applicant provide regarding parking. And then in terms of overall site access and circulation, the site has a number of nonconformities, existing nonconformities. During the site plan review process, the applicant's required to identify those, and the planning commission determines to what extent they should be corrected prior to site plan approval. The revised site plan addresses two of the our primary concerns with access and circulation, that being the two existing access drives. The applicant is proposing instead a single 25-foot wide access drive that will be two ways, which in our assessment will provide safer access, but the city engineer will have more comments on that during final site plan review. They also widen the parking lot island and are providing, I believe, 24-foot access drives, which in our assessment will provide for safer vehicular access overall. The spaces immediately south of the existing building, if designated for curbside pickup, we don't see any potential issues in terms of pedestrian access or staff meeting customers in parking spaces.
Recording in progress.
However, again, that's more information. The applicant will need to provide that additional information for the planning commission to review. We had some notes about pedestrian paths and sidewalks on site. Sidewalks proposed along the site's frontage. The applicant is going to be removing the patio, an existing patio that's in the front of the site, providing landscaping, which we support. They also indicate that a path will be provided connecting the public sidewalk to the site. That I don't believe that was identified on the plan. It can be provided at the final site plan stage, and we only recommend that it be spaced, or that it be spaced some distance away from the access drive. In terms of landscaping, the revised site plan identifies more of the proposed landscaping that will be reviewed during the final site plan phase, but our concerns at this point was just that there will be adequate screening on all sides of the site that seems to be provided. Lighting plan is included, but again, that'll be assessed in the final site plan stage. Same with elevations, any proposed signs, sign locations, that is, and floor plans. So the applicant has addressed many of the items we listed in our initial report, but of those that remain, we recommend that Planning Commission ask for a more detailed description of the curbside ordering component of the use, as well as any proposed traffic management plan. Those seem to be the two remaining issues that should be addressed prior to action tonight. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Does anyone have any questions?
One of the comments you mentioned in here when you talk about parking is that you talk about provisional versus recreational. What would be the requirements for recreational on this site? Should they apply for a different license in the future? Does that change the number of parking spaces that are required?
It would come down to, I think, again, that use isn't specifically listed in the zoning ordinance, so we would have to find a comparable, a use that's of comparable intensity and to select a parking requirement. I do believe in the other communities we reviewed that have adopted parking standards, they do require more parking, but we didn't review that extensively because it's not being proposed in this case.
Just my concern is, should that happen in the future? Right now, the type of parking is equivalent to what is required for a medical facility, correct?
Yes, it exceeds what's required for a medical office.
The one thing with this lot, and this has been decades in the making, is it is a completely non-compliant lot, and the house and all that, things were supposed to have been done in the past, and the city failed to follow up on that. This building and just making it just this one single building, and you said, except for the two drives, will meet compliance. There's no other non-conforming issues in terms of side yard setback or anything?
So in terms of nonconformities, eliminating that dwelling on site, that is a nonconformity in terms of use, which will be eliminated. The nonconformities related to access and circulation, those are specific to the city's access management standards, and they only have to do with the access drives, spacing from adjacent roadways and driveways. They're all specific to that consideration, or to that component of the site. But as far as setbacks, the existing building would meet required setbacks.
And this may end up being a question for our staff, city staff, but any concerns with the potential of widening of Michigan Avenue in there and the ability to have to acquire property for right-of-way?
That's something that we didn't assess as part of our review, but the applicant has submitted their preliminary site plan to MDOT, which is also a zoning ordinance requirement. So they'll provide any feedback about both the proposed access drives and if MDOT will require any changes. As far as was it the city requiring right-of-way? That's, we would have to look into that.
It'd be more of the state.
Or the,
right-of-way, because if
okay.
that eventually is widened, the concern will be, do they have enough property to not only put in sidewalks, but to actually widen that road to meet their demands in the future, so.
I would
Knowing that MDOT's reviewing it, I think that's a question for them to answer for us.
Yep.
Thank you. That's it right now for me.
Are there any other questions?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I don't know, our attorney, Mr. Forshee, is on the line. It looks like he's muted at the moment, but I wanted to provide him the opportunity to share any remarks on this issue, because he's been our legal point person on all things marijuana related.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So I think one of the issues that Mike brought to the forefront was that there's a curbside component to this. In the zoning district that this is in, it under special land use, only drive-throughs or drive-ups related to restaurants are allowed. So what we were looking for tonight is kind of a description of what that curbside service is, so that we can evaluate whether that is like a drive up or a drive through function that would not be allowed, or if it's, we just need to understand what that component is to see how it would be regulated and whether it could even be approved as a special land use. So if it were a drive through or a drive up, and that would not be allowed under the ordinance. So they'd have to get some kind of variance to do that. But, we just want to understand more about what that is. Is that the same thing as a drive through or a drive up to a bank or to a restaurant or to any other kind of drive up or drive through facility? We're just trying to understand what that means, and to see if that can be approved via special land use or if that needs some other process to go through. So I think that's what Mike was alluding to earlier. And that was kind of the part that I was involved in to try to help evaluate that.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
Mr. Chair, like Commissioner Gearbaugh, my thoughts went immediately to parking, and I really question the relevance of using the medical or dental comparison, because in most of those cases, the doctor knows the patient's coming, it's not open for public drop-in a whole lot in a lot of dental cases and in many medical ones. So that plus the curbside makes me worry about parking. Technical note, just for your notes, Mike, it's not the former Mickey's Dairy Twist. They're still serving ice cream cones today. And so we're losing that and replacing it with a dispensary. So it's not removing sort of an unoperating business, but nevertheless. So when I think about and then in our description of the public hearing, we're talking about adding 20 new parking spaces, but in fact, we're removing parking spaces. We're not adding new spaces. Maybe we've restriped some old spaces, but we're actually reducing parking spaces compared to what is there today. Parking has always been a problem on the site. The neighbors have always had arguments with the owners of this property relative to people parking in the retail plaza. So the ambiguity related to how many parking spots we really need with the employees plus the trips combined with the curbside service is a real issue in my opinion, and certainly something we can get a better understanding of, but that's sort of my thoughts at this point.
If there's no further questions of city planner, is there a motion to accept his report?
So moved.
All those in favor of accepting the report from city planner Auerbach?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Motion passes. This time I'd like to ask the applicant to come up and answer probably the one parking question and any other issues you'd like to bring up.
Good evening, distinguished members. Thank you for having me today. My name is Sean Mansour. I'm the attorney for the applicant. So I can answer the question about the curbside. Our intention was to number every single parking spot with a number and a phone number that people could pull into and park. And this idea came about during COVID. People didn't want to get out of their cars to go into a store. They wanted to stay in their cars. So we decided to put parking spots up with numbers, and that was what we envisioned. And if the city would like us to, we could dedicate a particular portion of parking spots for curbside. But it's not intended to be like a pull-up curbside type situation or like a tent situation where cars are pulling up and being serviced. They'll be in an actual parking spot, and an employee will safely come to them with either the product or do the transaction. That's what our intention was. And if it's a very big issue, we can pull that. That's a very small portion of our business. It's just sort of a customer service aspect. It's for the customer so that if they don't want to get out of the car to come in the store, but it doesn't make or break our business. It doesn't necessarily need to be a component of our business.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. And you guys, what was the other question that was asked? The peak employees?
That was another question from
It's an estimation, but running it through my head with receptionists, sales consultants, a manager. Are we counting the security outside as well?
Yes, anyone who would need to drive to the
Okay.
site.
I would say 5 or 6 or so, depending on how much volume we do out of the location. You guys have a beautiful community, but it's not like this is not the city of Detroit. There's not like 1 million people here, so I envision about 5 or 6 people, max.
I noticed you had room for 9 people to sit inside and be serviced. Did you,
In the lobby?
in the lobby? Do you expect that to be?
No,
at
no,
capacity?
there wasn't a rhyme or reason why we picked those many chairs. It's just, it happened to fit that many chairs. If it fit more, we would probably put up more, quite honestly.
Can I ask a question? Sure. Okay. Sean, if I could venture such impertinence.
Absolutely.
Is it the applicant's intent, now that the city has approved adult use marijuana, to transition or consider a recreational component to this
Yes.
enterprise? Okay.
Absolutely. But I will say that we applied before we ever knew that a rec ordinance was going to be introduced or discussed. We truly believe in this community. didn't know the community too well, but I spent a week here up and driving up, and I'm so impressed by your community. So we're looking forward to being part of the community, regardless of Med or Rec, but Rec definitely helps our business because now we're able to outreach more customers that are obviously 21 and older. I don't really know what the patient base is like in the city of Saline, so you guys have roughly 9,000 people in the city. I don't know how many of those are registered patients, and if I had to guess, it's probably less than 10%. So it wouldn't be a high-volume location if it was only medical. So our intention is, of course, to have both, to add on the recreational.
So for
component.
your edification, the recreational ordinances were approved unanimously by council this past Monday.
Yes, Ms. Ritchie let us know that,
Okay, and the application should be prepared by the end of business next week.
very good. And we're excited to be, are we still the only applicant at this time? I know the last time, when we applied, we were the only and first applicant.
I believe you are the only formal applicant. We are negotiating a sales agreement for a municipally owned lot on the east side of town.
Okay.
With a venture who would be, I think, pursuing both, likely adult use.
Well, good luck with that. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, just kind of understand the operations of the business.
Yes, sir.
Now, would this eventually become, like I've seen now, a lounge, or is there no consumption?
No, that's not allowed. If you guys allowed it, it's not in your ordinance, is it? The consumption lounges? You would have to enact an ordinance to allow that type of license, and it would have to be on a separate premises. It couldn't be in our premises. No smoking is allowed on the premises, inside the building or outside.
And then also, are you anticipating doing delivery? Because I know right now we have significant delivery coming from Ann Arbor.
It's not something we're considering at this time. Delivery is a very delicate component of this business. When you do it on a large scale, it makes sense for some of these retailers. When they do it on a small scale, it actually doesn't make sense. There's so much liability involved, and insurance, and things of that nature, and costs involved. So I don't know. I couldn't answer that right now, but if we were to deliver, we wouldn't do it without the permission of the municipality. I believe we'd want to come here and get that permission, but at this time, it's not something we're considering. We have another retail location in Oakland County. We don't deliver at that location.
Yeah, it's new for us too, so trying to understand how some of these aspects are going to be.
By the way, for what it's worth, I do cannabis law for a living. If you guys have questions outside of this application that you want to ask, I know you have a city attorney, and I don't mean to step on anyone's toes, but if you want to ask any questions related to the industry, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Question?
Yes, sir.
What would you say the average duration of a visit is to a dispensary?
5 to 7 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes or so. And it depends on operations. Some retailers operate, they just want to get the customer out. Our model is more comforting and consulting. I don't even like calling our salespeople bud tenders because it's just a bad connotation to that. But yeah, we'd like to take our time with the customer and really educate them on the product, and they appreciate that, and it seems to work from our business model.
Are there any other questions for the applicant?
And by the way, as to the parking spots, so part of the reason that we could have more parking spots, but the landscaping was a component that you guys wanted, so it's kind of give or take. If we had less landscaping, I think we could probably squeeze in a few more parking spots. Which we would prefer, by the way, which would be great for traffic flow. And I had mentioned to you that we're going to have full-time staff in the parking lot, directing traffic and also taking care of the curbside. So their job is not only to do the curbside, but also direct traffic. When you kind of see customers moving in a way they shouldn't, they're directing the traffic, so that'll help.
You mentioned that you would be demolishing the back building.
Yes.
Is there any thought to demolishing both buildings and building
Building from
something that's
scratch.
exactly what you?
We didn't,
What?
that wasn't in that's not in our budget at this time, and I can't speak on that on my own. I'd have to speak to the team and discuss that with them, but I don't know. I don't know what the cost would look like on that.
Okay.
But I will tell you this, we're definitely planning on refacing the building and making it look a lot nicer than it does on the exterior. Not to say it doesn't look nice, but we're gonna definitely treat this as a whole new redevelopment. It's gonna be like a brand-new property when you guys see it. You're gonna love it.
And actually, that was one of my questions.
Yeah.
So, when you redesign it, signage and all that, is it going to be subtle? Not,
So the name of our brand is Rush Cannabis. It's very subtle. It's not like green crosses or any marijuana leaves, it's not even green. And we'll obviously obtain approval from you guys for the signage, but we created a very friendly, it's rec-oriented, recreational. Medical is sort of, is tailored to that. And a lot of the medical dispensers you see will have the green crosses and the medical green leaves and things of that nature. But now with the recreational market, you can sort of create a brand that's more welcoming and light and, yeah, so.
I've seen where in some circumstances, they look like churches versus a medical kind of cannabis.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
stuff, so. Because that could come up as part of the special use requirements of that type of restriction.
Absolutely, and I'm sure you got, I tell the municipalities all the time, you guys can restrict the sign from the color to the size to whether it can light up or not, or whether we can have a sign or not. There's some municipalities don't even allow the retailers to have a sign, which is, yeah.
We'd like to be helpful with our
Sure.
developers and try to understand and make a kind of a, agreement on what we do. And we don't want to overdo it, but we want to make sure that it's whatever seems appropriate in the area and so forth, so appreciate that.
Yeah. One of our intentions also is to hire from within the community. We'd like our employees to be residents of the community. And then especially with the redevelopment as well, we'd like to hire contractors that have dealt with the community previously, dealt with some of your inspectors. So looking forward to that.
When you mentioned having people out to direct traffic and so forth, is that because of such high volume of cars coming in?
It's-
Or just confusion?
It's because they're already doing the curbs, if we're doing the curbside component, they're already out there doing the curbside, so it gives them another task to do when there's, if they're not servicing a customer. And it's just, we've noticed that it creates a better flow for the parking lot.
That's really tied to the curbside service. If that wasn't there, you wouldn't necessarily have to have staffing and such things.
We could. We're going to have security on staff during working hours at all times. So the security, that's something they could do. They don't, a lot of times they have downtime. They're not just gonna sit there. They're gonna direct traffic. They're gonna open the doors for customers. They do things of that nature for sure, yeah. Yeah.
Commissioner,
There seems to be an open question as to the weekend
Oh, yes.
trip estimates.
So I couldn't answer that for you, but I asked the engineer, and he emailed me a response if I could read it. He said, the traffic assessment utilizes ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers, trip generation manual, 10th edition, for modeling anticipated volume and peak hours for evaluation. Marijuana dispensaries are uses within ITE designated as Land Use Code 882. For this site, the size of the building is inputted, and ITE models the projected volumes and also provides the AM and PM peak hour traffic. Based on the use and the operational background, the dispensary would inherently generate more traffic in the PM and is so reflected in the evaluation provided. A total number of 173 vehicles daily with 15 trips during AM peak hour and 30 trips during PM peak hour is not anticipated to negatively impact the surrounding transportation network. And he sort of gave me an example of like a coffee shop. You'll find a coffee shop is typically a lot busier in the morning than it is in the afternoons or evenings, and it's like vice versa in this business.
So that doesn't really answer the weekend question.
Oh, the weekend,
Yeah.
I can't speak that technological, but I can say from my own personal experiences and practical experiences that weekends, you don't really have these peak hours like you do on the weekdays. When people get off work at 5 o'clock, you'll see a rush at 5:30. Weekends is busier. It's like Saturdays and Sundays are your busiest days, but it's sporadic because particularly people are home, so they're coming in at various times throughout the day.
And the 15 trips per hour on the weekend, or on the weekday, might equate to what on the weekend?
I couldn't tell you a number, but if I had to give a guesstimate, it'd be less because of the sporadic times that everyone's coming in. We don't typically see on the weekend like a 7 o'clock rush or a 5 o'clock rush or anything like that.
are there any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Have a great evening.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move to open the public hearing, affording the public an opportunity to speak to this issue at 7:34 PM.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Good evening. My name is Janet Dillon. Kind of weird being on this side of the table. I'm a city councilor, but I'm also a West Side resident. So I know this area very well. And I had a couple of questions that I wanted to bring to your attention, not looking for answers, just some questions or concerns. And it has nothing to do with the marijuana industry. It's more of the proximity of this building to residential areas. This is one of the only ones within our zoning that really kind of touches upon residential. And so that was what I did have some questions about curbside service, and I would encourage this board to be very thoughtful in granting curbside service. That might need to go and be looked at more as an ordinance of whether or not we want to. I don't want to see a special use granted that we can't claw back if we decide that that's not something, because that would be, according to our attorneys, I believe, granted in perpetuity. I also would like you to be thoughtful in whether or not granting delivery options. Once again, with that quality of life for those nearby residents, what those odor systems would look like if there's noise associated with them, security lighting, that thing. So looking at those pieces, I would like, and I appreciate that, I believe Mr. Gearbaugh mentioned this, about the consumption of cannabis on the property, and just confirmation that as long as it's not in our ordinance, it is not allowed. I know one of the issues that had come up from our planner was the access driveways, and I really appreciate planning being thoughtful in not just this, but all looks at the west side at this point. By my calculations, there's currently between Austin Road and Wellers, 15 driveway curb cuts in approximately a 2,000 foot distance. So there are quite a few of those, and remembering that that is currently just a one travel lane. So there's a lot of stopping of traffic. And I believe Mr. Gearbaugh also alluded to this, that at some point MDOT is going to have to look at that road for a widening and making sure that we're kind of looking at that as we plan forward in the community. And then I did want to mention, we talked about parking and those calculations that I do appreciate what Mr. Beardsley said. I wasn't sure how this sort of could be clumped with medical, because those are appointments versus drop-ins. And if it does change to adult use, and what would that recalculation be? And with that, I think I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Thank you. Ms. Dillon, thank you for your thoughts. I just want to say we really appreciate any criticism and any type of recommendations that this municipality may have. We don't want to be a nuisance for this municipality. We want to be a working partner, a very successful business in the community that can actually give back to the community with our success. So I just want to state that for the record. And if you guys do have any other questions, please feel free to answer. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Planning Commission. Mr. Beardsley, thank you for your comments about Mickey's. I really appreciate that. I live on that side of town. I've lived there for almost 3 years now, and I have concerns about the dispensary coming to that part of town. Number one, when you drive east on 12, that's going to be one of the first things you see. Many people come to Saline because of the schools. We become a part of this community because of the amazing events this city offers. I voted to support marijuana legalization because I truly believe in it. I do. But you have to be thoughtful where you're putting your dispensaries. Now, I hope they do an open meeting with the community members down there that live in River Ridge and the townhomes in Torwood. Bring in the other businesses, because I don't see why you need to go there and shut down one of Saline's most treasured places in Mickey's. Families walk there. Families walk up and down 12 there. I take my kids down there all the time, whether it be the bakery, the gas station to get some gum, Mickey's, or to pick up at Paradise or the Chinese restaurant. But we got to be thoughtful and think about this. There's other places where this can go. And I hope they open up and talk to the community members and find out what we want down at that end of town. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments?
Move to close the public hearing, Mr. Chairman, at 7:40 PM.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Are there any comments or questions from any commission members?
I just would like to make a comment for the record. I also live on that side of town. I walk to Mickey's. I was there on opening day. And I do think that I wish there was a better place for this. There are so many curb cuts there. It is very dangerous on that side of town. It's one lane outside of Mickey's. People make the left. It's just not a gateway. It's not the gateway we should have into our beautiful town. And I'm very, very upset about this. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Are there any other comments?
I just need clarification. It seems like we have a number of open issues that we have to discuss that for us to move forward even on taking a decision to approve or not approve or approve with conditions. Seems like it's too early at this point to make that kind of even approach. Should we be postponing this?
So the central kind of lingering question, which I believe the city attorney alluded to as well, is that without more detail about the curbside ordering component, we can't really assess how that sort of activity is treated under the zoning ordinance and how it could be permitted, if it's permitted in that district. As I believe Tom mentioned, other drive-through uses are treated as a special land use. In the case of the C3 district, automobile filling stations, service stations, and drive-in and drive-through restaurants are permitted as special use, but no other drive-up and drive-through uses are specified as permitted or special use in that district. By comparison, in the C1 district, drive-in and drive-through facilities such as drive-up windows for banks, drive-in cleaners, and other non-food related drive-up uses are permitted. But again, so in that district, uses other than food service are identified specifically. That's not the case in the C3 district. So in our assessment, it's not clear because there's no additional information about whether the curbside ordering would be considered a drive-up or drive-through business serving customers in their vehicle. To take as an objective assessment as possible, we would want to see more information. The options could be, and in addition, we would recommend that the applicant provide that the management plan identifies spaces. It sounds like all spaces will potentially be used for curbside pickup, which could, as we mentioned, also have implications for trip generation. And a few notes on that. The ITE manual is a conventional manual for estimating the expected number of vehicle visits. The 10th edition, which may be the most recent version, we're not an engineering office, we don't have a copy, but I can tell you that the manual itself is very specific in terms of its estimates for different kinds of uses. There are restaurants, dine-in only, with carry-out, drive-through, fast food, all of which have different estimates for potential trips. They're based literally on observations collected from sites around the country, and so it's a statistical estimate of how many trips are expected. I did read a review from another community that there is a higher margin of error in the estimates for provisioning centers, likely because they're such a new use and because the specifics of the operation can vary so much. It's hard to say. As we did mention, though, there is that other communities have adopted that one space for 200 or 300 square feet, which gives some indication of what other communities expect the parking demand to be. But back to the original question, you could approve and make a distinction that the provisioning center itself is permitted and that more information will need to be provided for the curbside ordering, you could postpone. A future recreational use would have to go through this process again. To some extent, it's the applicant's discretion when and if they want to apply for that. If they want to withdraw this application and resubmit with that included, if they want to postpone. The consideration being if later on during a site plan review for recreation, it's found that much more parking is needed, they'll be confronted with having to reconfigure the site after they've already established the use. So the action for tonight, though, could be postponed with however the board finds about that curbside component, or to approve with conditions about what information needs to be provided, or that specifically is not permitted at this point.
And if we were to say do not approve, what would that reset it back, or what other else would be a hindrance or a problem?
Yeah, I guess the denial outright would do that. I think, so from in that perspective, to give the applicant the opportunity to provide more information and for the commission to assess that use, and postponing would avoid that denial and the likely required time frame before the applicant can reapply.
If I may.
It's all right, go ahead.
Just really quickly, 2 points I'd like to make. Number one, it was not our intention to come into this community and shut down a staple in this community. We were looking for a good location, and it happened just to be a mutual transaction. Mickey's really is eager to sell their business. I don't know what's going on, but we've not pushed them to do it. It's a very mutual transaction. Secondly, if the curbside issue is a larger issue, which I'm noticing that it is, I'd love to discuss it further, and I'd love the opportunity to pull back, allow you guys to vote on the SLU and the preliminary site plans without any curbside use. And I'm totally okay with that, and we can discuss this issue at a further date if that's okay with the commission.
Actually, I have one question, and that is, I realize the recreational approval was just 2 days ago, so you.
I was just made aware of it today.
Right. So my question is, how soon do you anticipate applying for the recreational permit?
The day you guys come out with the application.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, and I don't mean to be obtuse, but the way I read the initial report from Carlisle Wortman, is that this met the criteria, of course, with conditions that are enumerated at the end of this memo for preliminary site plan approval. But noting what the petitioner's saying about re-engaging city staff and our consultants on the parking issue and potentially applying for the recreational adult use permit, it may make sense to postpone this. Now, conversely, the subsequent motion, I think the recommendation from Carlisle Wortman was to postpone on the special land use.
Yes, on the special land use, yeah, and yes.
Okay. Well, then I don't mean to, let's not split hairs. If I may, then I will make a motion to postpone, but we need a date certain. I would defer to the deputy clerk. Are we scheduled to meet in 2 weeks, or would it be more prudent to postpone to our first meeting in, well, actually, it'd be a second meeting in April?
I think due to time, we should, at a minimum, do the second in April.
Sean, you good with that?
What would be the turnaround on an application, though, for recreational, to have our staff there ready to do it?
Well, so it would likely be,
Understanding of what we're doing now?
Yeah.
So you said we're postponing this
Yep.
until the second week of April.
To allow.
second meeting in April.
Second meeting in April.
Yep, which will allow you to re-engage with staff on the whole curbside parking issue.
Okay.
And if we continue on the current trajectory, the application permit for adult use should be ready by the end of next week at the very latest.
Okay.
So it'd give you the opportunity to fill out that paperwork and have it evaluated by staff by the time we reconvene.
That's great. Could I still ask the commission to vote on the SLU, putting aside the curbside, and there's a simple reason as to why. We have a period of time on the contract to close on the property, and Mickey's has an expectation that we're gonna close sooner than later. So I'd have to go back to the sellers and make sure that this is okay with them, the adjournment itself, of course.
Yeah.
And I can't confidently advise my clients to purchase this property until there's some sort of approval. So what I would ask you guys today is to vote on the SLU issue and put aside the curbside issue, and we could even put it aside until we apply for the recreational license.
Okay. So the special land use is the subsequent motion. that you want us to vote on tonight, correct?
Correct, please,
Okay,
yeah.
so what we're entertaining right now is just the site plan.
Okay,
So, I would proceed, I think, I would prefer a motion to postpone to the date certain, which would be our second meeting in April, which would be the 27th, and then we can debate the merits of the special land use when we get to new business item 22-10. Okay?
I'll support that with the understanding that if staff does not have time, that we may not be able to receive. This is so new for staff, I do not want to put them under a time.
Well, then, well, the great thing about postponing is if we don't have the appropriate information or background to make an informed decision, you can simply postpone again.
I understand that, but I want to clarify that 3 weeks or 4 weeks may not be sufficient at this point in time. We could make it later if it was needed.
Mr. Mayor, if I could jump in, with your permission.
Certainly.
So as far as, a lot of times the site plan and the special land use are considered concurrently. I guess if we're going to postpone the site plan, I would just be specific about which, what information the applicant needs to furnish in order to, fulfill what the board needs to make that site plan review.
So, yeah, so go ahead, Tom.
And so I think there was some clarification in my mind about what the drive up is. It sounds like the applicant is willing to kind of just take that off the table. So I guess aside from the drive up, is there, what other information would you need, or what other information would staff need to evaluate the site plan?
Well, Tom, it sounds like the enterprise is going to transition from medical to adult use based on the fact that on Monday, those ordinances were unanimously adopted. So the applicant is essentially, my understanding, is just waiting for us to prepare the necessary paperwork so that they can fill it out and submit it and have it evaluated by staff.
I understand that. Yes. Yep. So your thinking is that the site plan would be better evaluated once they could be considered together, essentially.
Right, because you could be creating a problem with parking if we have a greater requirement for parking on a recreational perspective versus a medical one, and that would create a non-conforming use, and so then you'd have to have variances, and so at this point, it'd be smarter to consider the whole possible use of the property instead of just one use, if that makes sense. Especially when the developer, the applicant, is going to potentially going to do that once our application is ready.
If I can jump in for a moment. I think, so this specific the application being considered tonight is just for the provisioning center. So it will be the applicant's decision if and when they want to apply for that recreational component. But what's being considered tonight is just that provisioning center use. And so I think that should be the basis for any action by the commission. And again, it could be, the applicant could choose to withdraw if they want to apply for that recreational component as well. So does that answer, does that provide any clarity to considerations?
Yes.
Is the municipality keeping the medical ordinance? Okay, so the retail establishment can have both a medical license and a rec. Yes. So we wouldn't necessarily be withdrawing.
Okay.
Well,
I just want to make sure that we're considering the application before us. I mean, if the applicant is fine with waiting until the next, or whenever this is postponed to, for site plan review, then based on the practicality of knowing that he's going to submit for recreational, is that the case? Would the applicant say that that's a true statement?
Yes, what I will state is if I will agree to put off the site plan approval approval. If we can vote on the SLU approval today, it'll give us a better idea of where we're at as a company. And we can absolutely modify the site plans as we're working on our recreational application.
Okay, thank you.
So,
I just want to make sure the record was clear on that.
Mr. Forshee had recommended that we, first of all, as well as our planner, stick to the issue we have, which is this site plan for medical. And Mr. Forshee recommended we identify what it is we're wanting to see to allow us to move forward. Well, I'll answer that for me. I want to see a better understanding of the trips per hour, which would include the weekend estimates. Appreciate what Mr. Mansour has said about that, but I think we need to have something a little bit more independent to base our trips per hour on, which is going to help us with our parking deliberations, as well as a more, maybe less off-the-cuff estimate of peak time employment. So maybe get with the team and really assess what that peak time employment would look like. So we're really dealing with the parking issue as part of this next deliberation. That's sort of where I'm at on it. On top of that, of course, you have other concerns being voiced by residents, which isn't really a site plan thing, but we'll have to deal with that later.
May I just clarify something? Is the parking issue just a site plan issue, or is that also an SLU issue?
I think that's just a site plan issue. That would be my opinion.
I would concur. Yeah, we really have two issues with the parking, and that is the parking estimate for the medical use facility is less than what you have, but what is the parking for the recreational? And obviously you can't add parking, so.
Correct. I think this is an issue we can appreciate as well, because if we submit a recreational application and we have to change our site plan due to the new requirements, I think we'd agree to put it off as well. It makes sense after going through this all now with you guys. We can agree to put it off. We are definitely going to apply for a recreational license, so I can stay confidently on the record that we'll apply for that license with a new site plan, updated site plan.
All right, thank you very much.
Call for the vote, Mr. Chairman.
All those in favor of postponing the application until,
Make sure I second that, just to clarify that. That date's fine. We had to clarify.
so we're postponing the application until April 27th. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Motion is passed. Thank you very much. Next item is the application from Paul Schlick of Pulte Homes of Michigan LLC
Don't
for,
we have to do
SOU.
I'm sorry. We have new business. Application of AM and BH Industries LLC for special land use form Appendix A, Article 4, Section 404, for a medical marijuana provisioning center in the C3 district located at 751 West Michigan, Saline, parcel 1818-013-25-007.
And
We've
Mr.
already received the report. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chair, I just want to note I'm recused in this matter as well.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, did we actually receive your report on special land use?
Yes, it's all the same report with a preliminary site plan. We have some additional comments on the special land use that I didn't go through, but in light of the postponement, I can hold off on that unless the board prefers otherwise.
I'd want to hear them.
Okay. Okay.
Go ahead.
Up to
All
you,
right.
Mr. Chair.
Pardon?
I said it's up to you as to,
Oh, yes.
he has separate comments, it sounds like, on the special land use from the site plan.
Go ahead.
Somewhat. It's difficult to divorce the site plan from the intended use, but the city does have separate special land use requirements listed in section 905 that both the commission and council need to review. any proposed special land use to determine whether or not a permit should be granted. The first criterion of that section is that the use will be harmonious with the general objectives of the master plan. This site is designated as a general business in the master plan's future land use map. And one of the objectives of that section is to serve the larger need of the community for both convenience and comparison goods. The general business designation also includes special retail and service uses such as garden sales, business supplies, and auto dealerships. These types of general uses are generally developed along major road corridors. So a variety of commercial and retail uses. In our assessment, a provisioning center is consistent with that intent. And the next criteria has to do with the intensity of the use and whether it's designed, constructed, and operated in a manner that will be harmonious with the other uses in the general vicinity. In addition to some of our previous comments, the applicant provided the intended hours of operation, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., which is, among other characteristics, comparable in our assessment to the adjacent commercial uses. So in terms of the indoor provisioning center operation itself, it appears to be compatible. That said, the major question being the intensity of that curbside ordering component. Again, that could change the character of the use significantly, but without more information, we can't make that determination. The next criteria is whether or not the use would be hazardous or disturbing to existing or nearby uses. Both the security plan and odor management plan provides extensive details about any security concerns as well as odor. It seems that the applicant's been thorough in selecting equipment and providing detailed procedures of both how they'll maintain security and handle and package marijuana as well as store it to prevent excess odor, so we see no concerns there. Again, that issue comes back to the potential impacts of the curbside ordering component. For the next criterion, this is a redevelopment proposal for the site, which will be a benefit for properties in the immediate vicinity and the city as a whole. We defer to comments to the city's engineer on whether public infrastructure and facilities are adequate to service the site. And again, we don't anticipate any additional public costs resulting from police runs. That's not something that we're seeing with provisioning center uses, at least in our review of other communities. And again, the applicants provided a detailed security plan. And then in terms of the last item being consistency with the intent and purposes of the ordinance and the C3 zoning district. That again comes back to the curbside ordering component. As I mentioned previously, the ordinance does distinguish between where drive-up and drive-through services can be permitted and with what sorts of businesses they can be associated with. So in order to determine how that curbside ordering component would be treated under the zoning ordinance, we would need additional information. But that point aside, the indoor provisioning center component overall, in our assessment, meets the criteria for special land use to be permitted.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to accept the report from Planner Auerbach?
So moved.
Second?
Second?
Take a second. Young, all those in favor of accepting the report? Aye.
Aye.
If there's any further comment?
Just to reiterate, at this time, we'd like to withdraw the proposed use for curbside at this time until we apply for our recreational license. So please consider this application without curbside use or delivery use. Thank you.
Thank you.
Question for the applicant.
Yes, sir.
One of the standards of special land use is being harmonious with the immediate area. That can mean a lot of different things, but I'm just wondering, have you met with or talked at all to your neighbors about any concerns that they may have either on the site you know, and I'm particularly concerned back to the use of the property
Sure.
and the parking, and is there any concern that's been voiced?
We have not yet. Are you speaking to the potential landlord of that plaza that's adjacent?
Well, that would certainly be the most logical
Yes,
place.
yes. Our
where that
plan
would
is
be
to,
some concern.
our plan is to speak to the owner of that plaza, and we'd like the buildings to sort of mirror each other in terms of style and aesthetics and things of that nature, definitely. Absolutely.
Fair enough, thank you.
And Katrina, could you clarify what was sent out? And, I mean, the neighbors were notified about the special use.
About the plan, about the site plan, the special land use will go out once that's scheduled for council.
I see.
I think we're planning for April 4th, correct?
No, it'll have to be, it's the 18th,
Oh, because of the
for
noticing.
the 15 days.
At this time, are there any citizen comments? I'll open the floor for citizen comments, although, is your motion?
Actually, there, yeah,
Oh,
no public hearing for this
I'm-
motion.
I apologize. Is there a motion to accept the recommendation to postpone until April 27th for this issue?
I'll make that motion if the recommendation is to postpone.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, could I jump in real quickly? This is the special land use hearing, so there has been a notification, right, that's gone out 300 feet, 15 days in advance, with a public hearing component, correct?
Nope, so the public hearing was on the site plan portion. The public hearing for the special land use will be for council. So that has not gone out yet.
Okay,
So the planning is just making a recommendation to council tonight.
right. And I thought there was supposed to, I'm fairly certain there's supposed to be a public hearing at the planning commission level as well. I would recommend that.
Monday tonight.
I inquired that day and I wasn't sure, 'cause I thought that.
Well, there's no, let's just solve this real quick then. There's no harm in establishing a formal public hearing. I would be happy to make a motion to establish and open a public hearing, affording the public the opportunity to speak to this issue at 8:07 PM. There's got to be a second.
Second.
Gotta vote on it.
All those in favor?
Aye. I think the ayes have it there.
The ayes have it. So you're opening for a public hearing?
Hi, Ben Goodman again. Once again, I live at that side of town, and nobody in that area knows what's going on. I can tell you that right now. This is a backdoor deal, and you guys know it's a backdoor deal between two entities that do not live in this community, do not understand this community. Families have not been told in that area, that live in that area, that a marijuana dispensary is coming. And if you guys agree on this tonight and vote on this tonight and don't deny this, or at least come and talk to the people that live in that area. Okay, if Mickey's wants to close, that's their business to close, that's fine. But we should have a say as a community, whether we want this near our kids. This is gonna impact your schools. This is gonna impact property values at town. It's gonna impact the people that drive in. When they see the sign that says, "Welcome to Saline," you're gonna see a marijuana dispensary right there. I have no problem with them coming to town, but not right there. Let's think about this. You got families that are gonna be impacted there. I have 2 kids with disabilities. There's numerous kids with disabilities in that area. We walk up and down there. Is anybody gonna think about that? Please deny this.
Ms. Dillon?
Hi, Janet Dillon again. I am struggling with the idea that we're having a hearing, a public hearing, without it being noticed to the public. It's not mentioned in the agenda, so I would not consider this to be a valid one as, from this side of the table. You know, obviously you can make your vote, but I do struggle with that because it has not been publicly noticed. Thank you.
Just for the record, we will still comply with a public hearing if and when this goes to city council. Just want to be clear on that.
And if I could jump in about the procedure, so the action tonight, like I believe was mentioned, is just for the commission to make a recommendation. In the ordinance section 904, there's no requirement for the commission to hold a public hearing during this stage of review, as there's no action being taken. It's just a recommendation to council, ultimate approval. But after council receives that recommendation, then the public hearing is scheduled where they'll make a determination on the use permit.
So we have a motion on the floor.
I'll move to close the public hearing at 8:10 PM.
Thank you. Second. Close the public hearing. Second. All those in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Abstain.
Motion passed. So at this time, we have a motion on the floor to postpone the land use until April 27th, when the applicant will resubmit for,
My understanding is Mr. Auerbach has stated that the commission today can give a recommendation to council.
Well, it can postpone providing that recommendation.
I understand,
But
if we're postponing, what are we providing for the postponement?
there would
maybe
be,
the recreational permit.
The recreational permit? I would state that that's a completely separate application.
Yeah, it is.
Separate issue.
I apologize.
I just want to have an understanding, if we are postponing, which is fine, I just want to understand what I need to provide to the community.
so originally was those additional details about the curbside component, but if
We're withdrawing.
if those are being withdrawn, I don't believe we,
There's a number of items on the special use, including the MDOT response, that could justify postponing this. We don't have that information at this point, and if that's recommended as being considered,
So-
I'm concerned about MDOT.
okay. The MDOT component, the ordinance requirement for that is just that the preliminary site plan be submitted to MDOT. The applicant has indicated that they have. Ultimately, if MDOT determines that a permit, they'll need to apply for MDOT permits, and that changes will need to be made. That's to an extent the applicant's risk. But that, in our assessment, that is something, a verification that could be provided at the final site plan stage.
The final site plan does not go before council.
Okay.
So at this point, we're making a recommendation to council, the information is available for council, they will not get a chance to look at that again.
Mr. Chair, I have a clarifying question. Planner indicated it's not required that we have a public hearing for this because we're only a recommending body. Does that mean that we can't? Obviously, we just did, but, so our job is to recommend to city council what we think they should do. And personally, given what I've heard today, I'm not prepared to recommend this in any particular way for council. I mean, it's up to them what they want to do, of course. But if, in fact, the community really doesn't know what's going on and hasn't had enough of an opportunity to voice their support or concern with it, why would we feel like we should recommend it when we are somewhat in the dark as a body as to what the community wants? So, makes sense to me to postpone it and include in our next deliberation the opportunity for a public comment after proper noticing to the community, in my opinion.
Can I just jump in here? So I apologize for probably overstating that it was required, but it's very typical to have, even at the recommending level, to have a public hearing. So that's why the red flag went off in my mind that, we should allow the public to speak on the issue. And certainly it doesn't hurt, there's no rule saying that you cannot have a public hearing. You're a recommending body, so you're going to gather all the evidence that you can get to be able to make that recommendation. But you are looking for actual evidence. So if there's something from the public that you haven't heard yet, or if there's some piece of information that you can't make a decision without hearing from the public, or, I think you just have to articulate what information, because, it's not a vote as far as like, if the public comes out and then votes are all against it, that doesn't bind you. You have to go by your special land use standards when recommending, even being a recommending body. So, you just want to articulate what information you need to be able to make the assessment. And again, we're just talking about the medical at this time. So the applicant said, as far as the site plan review goes, they'd like to postpone so that they can kind of integrate recreational into the mix. But as far as the special land use and, you just have to articulate what it is that you're expecting the applicant to furnish, or what information you need to be able to make a decision.
Mr. Chairman, the applicant, let me one last.
Just a bit of clarification. Mr. Auerbach, is it correct that you said that if we were to withdraw our application for curbside use, that we've met all of the requirements for special land use approval?
That would be for the commission to determine. In our assessment it is, but as the recommending body, that their findings of fact. And
I just want to clear, it was your opinion that we've met all the conditions for approval?
there's, let me take a look.
I thought I heard him say earlier that it's his recommendation for approval if we were to withdraw the curbside use.
That's his recommendation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that these 18 other recommendations have been reviewed to the satisfaction of members of this planning commission or for the council in order to consider this as a special use. Being a representative of council, I don't believe we met that.
I guess what I'm trying to get at, everyone, is you guys have opted in for medical marijuana. I don't want to rehash that whole issue. I know how that goes with municipalities, and it gets very contentious. I just want to speak to the law and special land use guidelines, and if we've met those guidelines, and if we haven't, what do we need to do to meet those guidelines?
Right, and I think that's where I'm clarifying on his recommendation on their report. There's 18 issues that need to be resolved, but they're indicating that some of these won't be resolved in final site plan, and that will not be considered by council. So I'm
Can
looking at a number of these that need to be, because I know the members of council will be asking these questions. So as a member of planning and a member of council, I don't want to leave any open-ended items, because that's going to hang up the special use, and I would hate to have it denied if we don't answer all the questions.
I'm totally okay with that.
And that's why I'm trying to talk with,
Yeah.
not only for our members, but also
Yeah,
clarification.
Sean, did you see the memo here from Carla Wortman? Okay.
Yeah, I went through it.
That's on page 9, and it is, Mr. Gearby indicates, it enumerates the 18 conditions.
Yes, and my understanding is most of those conditions relate to the site plan, not the SLU. So before we leave today, I just want to have a very clear understanding of what we need to clarify as it relates to the special land use guidelines.
So, excuse me, so, items 1 through 5 on the recommendation page, those were items that applied both to the preliminary site plan and special use, which we recommended be addressed, to the satisfaction of the commission prior to approval. Following 6 through 18 were items that could be addressed prior to action on a final site plan. So we didn't distinguish between, it's like I had mentioned previously, it's difficult to divorce the use from the site plan. I would need to look up the requirements, but right-of-way considerations, if that's a concern of the commission, and wanting to see that verification from MDOT, that could be something the commission could ask for.
I'm not trying to be difficult. I want to leave here today with an understanding as what else we need to provide. As it relates to the special land use and not the site plan, because we've agreed to postpone the site plan for after we apply for the recreational application. But I believe we've met all the requirements for the special land use, if I'm not wrong.
Mr. Beardsley had mentioned before about being harmonious with the, being the 7 conditions to be considered with special land use, and one of them was about being harmonious. And you have stated that you haven't even discussed it with any of the adjacent landowners or anything like that. I think that that's something that would have to be addressed before I would feel comfortable with recommending this to council, because if your neighbors don't know what's happening,
No, I
How can you
understand
be
it's our
harmonious?
responsibility to be harmonious with the community. I don't know necessarily that it's our responsibility to contact the building owners and to make sure that we're synergizing in terms of our aesthetics and appeal to the community. But yes, I agree with you. It's our job to be harmonious. And when it's our intention to reach out. Look, if you guys are looking for a reason to adjourn this, that's fine. I just want to have an understanding before we come back of what I need to provide you guys with for this special land use, please.
Yep, and
I think that's staff and our planner's position to provide that. We may not be able to do that tonight, because it's clear there isn't.
Well, I do think, because I've heard it from at least one commission member tonight, Sean, on page 9 of the memo dated December, is that right? March 2nd, excuse me, I don't know what the hell the December date's on there for. Items 10 and 11 reference communication feedback from MDOT, I think is probably going to be very important, not only to this body, but to city council more specifically.
Sure.
So I think that's an issue that we'll definitely want some clarification and insight on prior to.
So we submitted a preliminary, the engineer did it, something preliminary with MDOT, and then we'll be submitting for a final permit.
I believe they'll respond, and with a determination of whether a permit's required.
Yeah, and I believe a permit will be required in this instance.
Okay.
Unfortunately, they tend to move at a glacial pace, but.
I hope not.
I don't think we're trying to be, firm and nasty or anything.
No, I don't,
With 18 conditions, I'm not comfortable, okay? And the opening line says, prior to recommendation of the special land use and preliminary site plan. So it's both of them that we're looking at, we need these things. So the 18 things, maybe you've checked off 1 or 2, but we've not seen that, and staff needs to review that before we can say, we're cleared up. And I'm not comfortable. I'm gonna vote for postpone.
I appreciate that, and just for clarity, there are not 18 recommendations, there are 18 responses. And in fact, I would guesstimate that 15 out of 18 or 14 out of 18 of those state that we've sufficed the issue. So it's really only 2 or 3 issues. The main one was the curbside issue, which we've discussed today. I'm literally walking away with not an understanding as what else we need to provide as it relates, and we've gone back and forth with this report. Mr. Ritchie knows we've supplied modifications to our plans, and my office supplied a letter responding to all the inquiries. So we really have those 18 issues. We've responded to all of them. I believe majority of them have sufficed, and the minor issues that are outstanding are the curbside and he wanted to know the number of employees at peak hours. That was really it. Me walking in today after reviewing today's agenda, that was what I was prepared to discuss. I don't think there are any other issues that I'm aware of. But again, if I feel it in the room, we need an adjournment. An adjournment's fine. I just wanted to get clarity as to what we need to supply you guys with.
So
That's all.
here would be my opinion, Sean, take it or leave it. So let's get clarification on the 2 items that are enumerated, reference MDOT.
Okay.
And then I do think that Commissioner Young makes a good point, that while I think your interpretation of being harmonious with your neighbors is correct, I think in this community, we pride ourselves on open, aggressive, robust, proactive communication with all stakeholders. So some sort of obligatory letter or email to some adjacent property owners, just sort of informing them as to what you're proposing, I think is a best practice. And I think would be well received by the community and more specifically this board.
And I think that's respectful of them as well. I agree.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think part of it too, from what I'm hearing from multiple commission members, is that the site plan and the special land use, they go hand in hand, because the use is what is articulated through a site plan. and I understand that there's separate standards for each, but it sounds like there's still a few outstanding site plan issues that are hanging out there that impact how the site is actually used. So I think some of that information that you asked for regarding the site plan may inform the actual use on the property. And so I'm hearing that because of the ambiguity in the site plan at this point, you can't quite make the decision on special land use because it may be impacted. So I just wanted to throw that. That's kind of what I was hearing from some of the commission members.
And that's okay, Attorney Forshee, that we put those two back together and hold up special land use because we have site planning issues?
I think you've articulated some site plan issues, but I think you have articulated some just land use issues, special land use issues that the mayor talked about. So, you know, I think you've articulated enough to postpone for the time being because the two kind of are interrelated. So yes, I mean, if the board needs to hear more evidence from the public and it can't decide if something is harmonious or not yet, because they haven't heard enough evidence, then that is a valid reason to postpone.
To add to that, you may want to cite the applicable special use review procedure items. So we had discussed traffic-related issues under the second criteria in section 905, which has to do with site being designed, constructed, and operated and maintained so as to be harmonious in appearance with existing and other uses in the general vicinity. So I think the request for the applicant would be to provide whatever information, either their correspondence from MDOT or verification that the plan's been sent to MDOT, as well as any concerns that the commission may want to hear from the public related to either that criterion or another appropriate criterion in that from that section.
Do we have a motion on the floor?
I'll move to postpone to April 27th. And I don't think we need to have any more discussion on that because we don't have to put a condition on it. I just need to have, someone wants to second that motion.
I'll second.
It's been moved and second to postpone the SLU until April 27th. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Motion's passed. Now we have an application from Pulte Homes of Michigan LLC for final PUD site plan change for Bella Trace, formerly Lair Farms, to change the color of the fencing located at 6675 Maple, parcel number 181230-300-002 and 004. City Planner Auerbach, do you have comments on your report?
Sure. This is maybe a relatively brief consideration. The action before the commission tonight is an administrative approval of a change to an approved site plan for the formerly Lair Farms development of Saline, now Bella Terrace. The change is specific to fencing proposed along Maple Road. The original site plan approved ornamental fencing along the right-of-way that would include both a post and rail fence that was to be green vinyl as well as walls with a stone facade. The applicant is proposing to change the color from green to black vinyl. This sort of review can be done administratively, but given both the prominence of the corridor and its designation as a gateway corridor in the master plan, The city had adopted specific design guidelines for this corridor. We're recommending that it come to the commission for approval. On the second page of our review, we identified the locations where the changes were being made. The applicant also provided images and updates to the applicable site plan sheets showing the detail, both of the walls and fencing in general, as well as the specific change. The design guidelines and the city's corridor plans give direction on the form, but generally permit some deviation in specifics. So for example, the rendering for fencing along gateway corridors requires white vinyl. We already are aware that different colors are incorporated in other gateway corridors. So in our assessment, the specificity at the level of color is flexible if the commission chooses to allow for that. We see no issues with the proposed change, but it'll be for the commission to assess and determine.
Are there any questions for city planner?
Are you sure that we didn't require white? I mean, we put white on everything coming in on Michigan Avenue, and I'm not sure, but I think also from West Michigan Avenue too. So why would we want to not be consistent on Maple?
So this could be, as with the ice cream business, something I may not be aware of, but in looking through our past reviews that we submitted for the Phase 1 component of this project, it was reiterated that the color was selected to mirror the historic fencing at the historic building at the Davenport House, which is green, correct. But that's, I think, a part of the reason that we recommended the Planning Commission discretion, because I think you're all in a better position to determine what is appropriate and what level of consistency you're looking for in the gateway corridors.
And we still plan, we still plan on having those, the brick posts in there that shows in this diagram, correct?
Yes, our understanding is none of the other design elements are changing.
I mean, I suspected that the reason why they requested the green was to tie in with the Davenport House. And now to use black would not tie in with anything. So I could see changing it to white, but I don't support changing it from the colors. There are many things that have been promised out of this development. I hate these things coming back and changing as they don't seem to be the same as what we all agreed to when this was first presented to us. So from my perspective, the changing, and I'm going to make this statement right now, the changing from Lair Farms to Bella Terrace is a great example of a kind of slap in the face to the city. So at this point, I will not support changing this color from what is either proposed unless it goes to white.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I would concur with Dean. I would like to stay with that consistency of that fencing. 22 years ago, we had to put a fence up in the bank that I worked with, and that was the original design of that fencing that was gonna be all through the city. And I'd really like to keep that going. I think that's fair.
I tend to agree, and I think this was the convincing factor that I don't like it. And it's not what I would expect coming in from the north into the city, because when you come over that hill, it's again one of those gateways. And when the house first went up that's out there, you know, I hadn't been out there in a couple of days, literally. And, you know, that's the first thing you see. So I think that the field will be no. I think we need to maintain that. And the Curtis Mansion, I realize it's green, but it's been green. It's been green for umpteen years. So we look at something that's historic, and that's a little different story. This is not that.
Any other
Chair,
comments?
I'll make a motion to acknowledge receipt of Mr. Auerbach's March 15th report.
Second.
All those in favor of accepting city planner Auerbach's report?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion accepted. Bill, comment?
Good evening, Commission. My name's Tom Covert. I'm with Midwestern Consulting, and we are simply here tonight to request the color change to the fence. If it's your wish to allow or not allow the black, I would ask that if you could allow an option of white or black, that would be great. Because one of the problems is also sourcing materials currently. We do believe, however, that the aesthetic, being part of the landscape design team, the aesthetic of the black with the current home materials and trends and housing colors and those kinds of things would really give it some contrast with the green landscape, the earth tones of the stone pillars and so on. But I understand aesthetics can be discretionary, so if you do not like the black, I would like the option to have green or white, depending on what could be sourced. Thank you.
Any questions for the applicant?
Just a question maybe for the applicant, but, I mean, green's already approved, right? So we don't need to vote on that.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Just white as an option then.
Well, I'm sorry to ask another question, but do you have an opinion aesthetically as to how white will work with the homes being built?
So with most of the projects that we're working on, I'm not an architect, but many of the trims and finishes currently are dark in nature, like black is very prominent in window casings and so on currently. So we thought it would have good complements internally that way. I can understand the opinion of white because I do see it throughout the city and the other gateway areas. We liked the green for the Davenport home play there, but I guess if I were to pick, and I'm doing a couple home renovations myself, I would prefer black, but
When does the fencing go in?
it'll be going in when they are installing the landscape and finishing up with the grass and the trees and so on. So it's still a bit of time yet.
Right, and so part of the reason for the application was supply chain issues with sourcing
True, yep.
green fencing versus black. Is that something that you really can say will be an issue at the point you have to put it in?
I don't know that I can say that.
If I may, Mr. Chairman. Tom, appreciate your patience this evening. I agree with you. Aesthetically, I prefer black. I have black fixtures and some trim at my house, and I think it contrasts nicely. Aesthetically, it's quite appealing. I prefer it over a white or off-white or almond. But I think the point is well taken that, at least from my perspective, I'm looking for consistency throughout the community at our various gateways, both to the south, east, west, and now north. So I am also inclined not to grant the request to transition to black, but to allow some sort of off-white or shade of white that mirrors the existing gateway features, or, of course, as Mr. Troika indicated, a green that would mirror the Davenport home, the Curtis Mansion. So that's my position.
No other comments?
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Do we have a motion on the floor?
I have no problem making a recommendation with the exception of allowing white instead of green. That's the way we can do it.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that. So it's really a second option.
Correct, just not black.
Do we want to specify, though, because is it actually, I don't mean to get real technical here. Is it,
It's either white, there's areas where it's white and there's areas where it's off-white.
okay. I think my hunch is the consensus would be to either go with the green or to go with a shade of white that mirrors what exists at our other geographic gateways.
I think there are other Pulte development in a similar, I think there's some gateway there with fencing, but I might be wrong. Macon Road?
On Huntington Woods?
Well, whatever's consistent along Michigan Avenue in terms of the Sauk Trail or any of that new stuff that's gone up on Michigan Avenue, that's fine. There's different materials. There's been vinyl, there's been wood, so depending on what color they paint it, but something in a white or neutral color.
So we have motion on the floor to allow a alternative of white fencing. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Beardsley was the second on that motion.
Motion, all those opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you, Tom. We've got one discussion item, Mr. Chair, if I may. I'll be very brief. I'll exercise brevity. Just wanted to inform the commission that Mr. Gensheimer, who appeared before us for a final site plan for development on what is currently a municipally owned lot on Woodland Drive, has indicated that he plans to proceed with closing on the property. He will be complying with our existing standards and not petitioning the Zoning Board of Appeals for a variance in terms of specific building material. And as you may recall, he had also petitioned City Council to reduce the price, which City Council denied. So he is amenable, at least at this juncture, to paying the asking price or the price that had been negotiated and not pursuing a variance to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And if we remain on the current trajectory, we expect to close on the property either the first or second week in April.
I have one item also, Mr. Chairman. We got hung up a little bit today on the marijuana dispensary in terms of what a drive-up was, a drive-through was, what curbside was, et cetera. And I guess first a question, do we have an ordinance that relates to curbside? And if not, is that something the ordinance committee should take up? Because I think Mr. Mansour was correct when he said it evolved out of COVID and a desire for consumers to be served without going into a facility. And if we don't have our arms around that, we're gonna run it up against this time and time again, I think.
Yep, it will be addressed.
I'm sorry?
It will be addressed.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I can speak to that as well. So when we drafted the ordinance, it wasn't clear whether under state law they could do a curbside or drive-up type thing. Very recently, within the last couple weeks, the state said yes, it is allowed under state rules, only if it's allowed under local rules. So yeah, it was a very, we defaulted to the conservative approach that no, it's not, or, because that's under your existing ordinance, only certain drive-through, drive-up type uses are allowed. But I agree that now that the state has said, in their rules that it's allowed if the locals allow it, it'll be a topic of discussion. Now, whether you want that to be allowed or not allowed, that's a policy decision. Some people think it would be a problem, others don't. So that'll just be a policy decision that'll have to be made. But yeah, we would recommend, clarifying it so that we have a good path going forward for future applications. And I can say in the future, now that recreational has passed, we're going to get more combined applications. So I think some of this awkwardness that is happening because we're hearing a medical case, knowing that a recreational is going to follow right behind it, and trying to predict how that may impact the site overall. That leads to a little bit of awkwardness. It's unavoidable, but that's just the way it is. Once recreational is up and running, I imagine that a lot of places will apply to you for a special land use for both at the same time. And that might help inform how they're reviewed. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Just the one thing on the curbside, that is a whole different thing, not just with marijuana, but with all of our other businesses in terms of that, which I hope that whatever we do in looking at that, we'll also consider that, especially uptown, and there's issues with where people are parking and concerns about safety and such, so.
Yeah, I guess my question is, do we have anything to say about it? God forbid there's not another COVID outbreak, but if the governor puts on additional restrictions, which is why the applicant mentioned in the first place, whatever rules we have may be circumvented.
I just think it's the idea of allowing it and figure out where do we allow it, because I think most businesses are moving to that model, so we've got to figure out how to handle that in a downtown area, because we don't necessarily have the ability to do it on on Michigan Avenue, so we've got to start identifying other locations. We're running into that problem throughout the downtown area.
So if I may, this is a question for the deputy clerk. So is the intent then to have this issue reviewed and discussed at the code review committee for potential ordinance change or modification?
Yes.
Okay. Right. So Bill, as our liaison, will expect you to follow up on that and report back, hopefully in the not too distant future. In fact, you have a meeting tomorrow?
No, we had one today.
Oh, today, excuse me, okay.
And just one other discussion, we met today with the other candidate for the community development position, so we're hoping good things will happen in the next month or so to fill that position.
Great.
I think tonight kind of would explain that it would be helpful to have that balance between staff and yourself and whatever else to help clarify things.
Any other discussion items?
I'll move to adjourn, Mr. Chairman, at 8:46 PM.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes.